Hey, 42 here. On the island of Sicily, you will find a gravestone. It reads, Flamma Secutor lived 30 years, fought 34 times, won 21 times, fought to a draw 9 times, a Syrian by nationality. You might not know it, but you are looking at the gravestone of arguably the greatest gladiator who ever lived. Flamma, which means flame, was a soldier in the Syrian army who was captured by the Romans, sold into slavery and tossed into the gladiator arena. But it was here that he would find his calling. Living for the fight, Flamma fought as a secutor, which means he wore a big metal helmet, wielded a Roman gladius, a legendary Roman short sword, against the retiaris, an incredibly agile, highly skilled opponent armed with a trident and a net. The retiaris, meaning net man, was styled after a fisherman. Using his weighted net and trident, he would trap his opponents and skewer them alive. Alternatively, he would use his net to entangle his opponent's weapon. But Flamma, as a secutor, meaning pursuer, would hunt his opponent down like a sword-wielding Mike Tyson, and dodging his net and the long reach of his trident, rip him to pieces with his gladius. Flamma was so successful and talented in the arena that he quickly became a celebrity and the face of a Roman coin. But perhaps most extraordinarily, he received the rudis, a wooden sparring sword that meant he had won his freedom. Not once, but 4 times. And each time, he turned it down. Apparently, retirement from this brutal and often fatal sport wasn't quite his thing. Eat your heart out, Russell Crowe. Interestingly, seeing that recent studies have suggested gladiators were mostly vegetarians, he may also have been the toughest vegetarian of all time. There have been countless warriors throughout history, but what makes one truly great and earn legendary status? Is it his fighting prowess, his bravery, what he used his skills to accomplish? Or it may simply be someone who regularly confronts death and is a master of his form of fighting. Someone whose accomplishments stand out even to this day. There has been Leonidas I of Sparta, the legendary Spartan king who led 300 Spartans against Xerxes. Yu Fei, who fought in 126 battles and never lost. Prince Rupert of the Rhine, who was so gifted in battle, his enemies believed he possessed supernatural abilities. Or Simon Bolivar, who during his campaigns rode 123,000 kilometers, more than Hannibal, Napoleon, and Alexander the Great. Or there is the bravery of the Anzac fighting troops that led German commander Erwin Rommel to say, "If I had to take hell, I would use the Australians to take it, and the New Zealanders to hold it." But from all these incredible warriors, there are some so unique that they stand out amongst the rest. Mongolia has been the birthplace of some of the most savage and gifted warlords the world has ever known. The Mongolian Empire to this day stands as the largest contiguous empire in history, largely due to the unstoppable aggression of Genghis Khan. Mongolians have historically been unmatched archers and horsemen, and could rival far more technologically advanced foes. That's why when a woman emerges from amongst their hordes and starts handing them their arses, it's time to take notice. Kutulun was a 13th century Mongolian warrior princess. She was a great-granddaughter to Genghis Khan, niece of Kublai Khan, and the favourite child of Kaidu, the ruler of Changati Khanate, consisting of Xinjiang and Central Asia. And she was one he regularly sought out for advice and counsel. Like most Mongolian warriors, she was adept at horse riding and archery, and she would often ride side by side with her father in battle, taking captives on horseback as she raided enemy towns. But it wasn't this that made Kutulun stand out. It was something far more unique. You see, alongside being able to fire an arrow through your head whilst hanging off the side of a horse saddle, Mongolian warriors were also fearsome wrestlers, and she was, perhaps, the best of them all. Kutulun would often dress in men's outfits and challenge enormous warriors to a match. She would always win. When her father attempted to marry her off, a fiery and headstrong Kutulun refused, telling her father she would not marry any man who could not best her in wrestling. Amused at his daughter's defiant spirit, Kaidu set up a simple competition. If you could defeat Kutulun, you could marry her. If you failed, you had to give her 100 horses. Men came from all corners of Mongolia to face her in combat, and her father watched as her would-be suitors faced her one by one. But by the end of the competition, Kutulun remained unmarried and had 10,000 more horses to her name. I'll let you do the maths on that one. One such fight was recorded by none other than the legendary traveller Marco Polo himself. He wrote that a wealthy, handsome and powerfully built prince once arrived to fight Kutulun. He had healthy, beautiful horses, a huge body of servants, and everyone around whispered that this was sure to be the husband of Kutulun. When word got around that the fight was to begin, a huge crowd, which included Polo himself, gathered to watch. The combatants locked arms, with the prince immediately demonstrating that he was far more than any ordinary opponent. With the crowd of spectators beside themselves with excitement, the two warriors went back and forth, each gaining the upper hand for far longer than any opponent had against Kutulun before. But then, something unexpected happened. Without warning, Kutulun shifted her positioning, gained the leverage she needed, and viciously slammed the prince to the ground, silencing both the prince and the once excited crowd. The fight was over, and Kutulun was victorious. Although there are conflicting reports of Kutulun's love life, there are no official records of her ever getting married, and all that is clear is that through her legendary wrestling, fighting, skill and bravery, she brought so much respect and wealth to the family that her father wanted her to be the next Khan. And when her father died, Mongolian tradition made clear that his heir wouldn't actually be his son, but rather his strongest. No prizes for guessing who that was. Nobody knows what happened to Kutulun past this point. It is unclear how she died. And it is clear that, for some reason, she never came to rule. But there is one thing apparent in her story. There's never been a warrior quite like her. Now, everyone knows the cliche of the lone samurai warrior, the one who wanders Japan, cutting enemies down left, right and centre, all while seemingly having no real purpose. He's been the inspiration for countless films, comics and cartoons. But what if I was to tell you that there was a real guy who was just like this, and he's probably the sole reason that the cliche exists? Miyamoto Musashi was a samurai ronin who wandered Japan in the 16th and 17th centuries, killing the most dangerous enemies he could find. So legendary was his fighting ability that even now he is considered by many to be the Kensei, or sword saint, of all Japan. Born in the Harima province, Musashi was trained in the art of the sword by his father, as well as the family art of the jite, an ancient Japanese police weapon. He was soon moved to a Buddhist monastery where he learned Buddhism that he would later return to in his life. He was bold and talented, and aged only 13, he faced his first opponent. Arima Kihei was a swordsman who encountered Musashi along the banks of the Saho River. Musashi, eager to test himself, charged Kihei and struck him with his cane and challenged him to a duel. Kihei responded with a slash of his sword, but by now Musashi was too close and tackled the man to the floor, where he then proceeded to beat him to death with 14 to 15 blows of his cane. After this, Musashi travelled around Japan, engaging in more and more duels, known to many as the musha shugyo, meaning Samurai Warrior's Quest. He also fought in the famous Battle of Sekigahara, where some have suggested he refused to fight as his lord's vassal, which is perhaps the moment he became a true ronin, a masterless samurai. And it was here that some of his most legendary duels began. He went on to gain a reputation as a master swordsman and was awarded the title Unrivaled Under Heaven by Shogun Ashikaga Yoshiaki. This was why when Musashi challenged Yoshioka Shijoro, the master of the Yoshioka fighting school, to a duel, he immediately accepted. But Musashi was a far more cunning opponent than he'd anticipated. Using the customs of the day to his advantage, Musashi deliberately arrived late to the duel, enraging Seijuro and causing him to lose his composure. When the duel began, Musashi struck swiftly, striking his angry opponent on the left shoulder, knocking him out and crippling his left arm. With leadership of the school now passing on to Yoshioka Denshichiro, an equally deadly swordsman, Musashi was immediately challenged to a duel in order to avenge his defeated master and restore honor to the school. Musashi eagerly accepted. Taking place in Kyoto, Denshichiro arrived wielding a long staff reinforced with steel and prepared to kill the disrespectful Ronin. But he hadn't learned from his former master's fate. Arriving late, Musashi once again threw his opponent into a rage, and within minutes Musashi had taken advantage of his poor composure, disarmed him, and defeated him, outraging and disgracing the Yoshioka family. But it wouldn't end here. With leadership now falling to a 12-year-old boy named Yoshioka Matsuchiro, the school assembled a small band of swordsmen, archers, and even musketeers, and, having challenged Musashi to another duel, waited for him to arrive late and end his life. But Musashi had done something completely unexpected. He had arrived early. Hiding in nearby bushes, Musashi sprang into the middle of his opponent and ferociously attacked. Startled and inexperienced, Matsuchiro was almost immediately slain, and then Musashi escaped, defending himself against the archer's musket fire and the pursuing swordsmen under incredible pressure. Musashi was forced to draw his second sword in order to survive, and using it to successfully escape. It was here he invented his own unique style of samurai fighting, called Niten Ichi-ryo, fighting with two swords. But as shocking as these duels were, his most legendary duel was yet to come. After fighting over 60 duels and never once tasting defeat, there was only one opponent who was thought to be an equal, if not superior, to Musashi: Sasaki Kajiro, the demon of the western provinces. In an age where sword fighting was a really big deal, these were the two biggest deals of all. Sasaki was perhaps the most feared warrior of his time. He was composed, fearless, and the exact opposite of Musashi, respectful and an adherent of tradition. He wielded a nodachi, a huge Japanese sword, almost 3 feet long and much heavier than a normal sword. But despite this, Sasaki was said to wield it with unnatural speed and power. A duel was arranged on the island of Funajima, and standing on the beach with his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, Sasaki waited for his opponent. Arriving late and by boat, Musashi swaggered up onto the beach with an unkempt, disrespectful appearance that outraged Sasaki's supporters. But this wasn't Musashi's only plan. Sasaki drew his enormous nondachi and prepared to fight, only to be met by Musashi's weapon, a bokken, a wooden sword that he had carved from the oar of his boat, and one that was just as long as Sasaki's. The fight began. Within seconds, Sasaki had struck. But when his blow came down, Musashi was not there. He was standing to his side, and all of a sudden, Sasaki felt himself stumble back, then fall to the ground. He did not know what had occurred, but soon he was on his back, staring up at the blinding sun. Within seconds, he was dead. Musashi had brought down the bokken onto his head, splitting his skull, and then smashed it into his chest, shattering his ribs. Some theories state that Musashi used the sun behind him to blind his opponent. Others state he had timed the duel so well that he used the tide to help him escape Sasaki's vengeful students. Either way, the result was clear. Musashi was still undefeated, and the greatest swordsman the world had ever seen. Later in life, when he had done killing people, Musashi retired to a cave, embraced his Buddhist roots, and wrote the Book of the Five Rings, one of the most famous and influential books on strategy and philosophy ever written. And his techniques of taunting, mocking, and disrespecting his enemies so they'd become filled with rage and lose their composure were so successful that they were copied by the English at Agincourt to defeat the French, and they were later adopted by fighters like Muhammad Ali and Conor McGregor. But so far, These are individual warriors, all of whom are long dead. Is there a band of warriors still alive who to this day maintain a fearsome and unrivaled reputation? Yes. With an average height of 5'3", it would be easy to dismiss the Nepalese Gurkhas of being at a disadvantage. But you couldn't be more wrong. The Gurkhas have a legacy of fighting prowess, bravery and exceptionalism that is equalled by very few in the modern world, and it is all summed up by their motto, better to die than to be a coward, and their famous bladed dagger, the Kurki, which is said to need to taste blood. The Gurkha story began in the 19th century when border disputes between the Kingdom of Nepal and the East India Company led to the British being so thoroughly impressed with the Gurkhas' fighting ability that they did whatever they could to get them on their side. And they succeeded. They were soon incorporated into the British Indian Army proper. Today they come under the banner of the Royal Gurkha Rifles and are, in every way, a contingent force of the British Army, as are the SAS or the Marines, except their numbers are recruited from Nepalese nationals, not British. Though Gurkha HQ is in Britain and they are trained in Britain. Their impressive combat record has never, not even remotely, diminished, with them being awarded over 25 Victoria Crosses, the highest award of honour in Britain, and the Gurkhas have perhaps more stories of exceptional bravery than any other fighting force on earth. For example, there is Lakhiman Gurung, who, after being severely wounded by grenades, successfully fought off 30 Japanese attackers and survived, earning him the Victoria Cross and preventing his position from being overrun. There was Banabakta Gurung, who, when his entire unit was pinned down by an enemy sniper, calmly stood up, blew the sniper away, and saved his comrades. Later, when confronted with multiple enemy foxholes and bunkers, Gurung charged into battle, didn't wait for orders, and stormed the foxholes and bunkers solo, killing multiple enemies, surviving countless rounds of light machine gun fire, and taking the final position for himself by cutting the enemy down with his Kurki. He was awarded the Victoria Cross. There was Bishnu Shrestha, who, when his train was boarded by dozens of thieves armed with knives and firearms, proceeded to unsheath his Kurki and attack them so savagely he hacked a few of them to pieces before being cut down. Or Deprasad Pun, who single-handedly fought off 30 Taliban insurgents, using every single weapon he could get his hands on, including 400 rounds of ammunition, 17 grenades, a claymore, and even battering a man to death with his machine gun tripod. For this, he was awarded the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross. Although slaughtering people isn't something I approve of, the Gurkhas are certainly very good at it. But there are a few more modern legendary warriors besides the Gurkhas, whose exploits stand shoulder to shoulder with any throughout history. Blair Paddy Mayne was a heavyweight boxer, Island and Lions rugby player, an all-round tough guy, and one of the founding members of the British Special Air Service, SAS. The Special Forces unit thought to be the most lethal and best trained in the world. In fact, the SAS was the first modern Special Forces unit on which all of the forces around the world have been modelled. After doing a stint in military prison for striking a commanding officer, beating the hell out of people in barroom brawls, and leading night raids on airfields in Africa during World War II, Paddy found himself in Oldenburg, Germany, where his unit was pinned down by enemy fire. Not dismayed, Paddy jumped in a jeep, drove around killing the enemy snipers, drove away the enemy position in the nearby woodland, and patrolled a nearby road, ordering the gunner to pour machine gun fire into the enemy positions. When this was done with, he helped personally drag his wounded men back to safety, whilst the enemy continued to fly through the air. Throughout his military career, he was awarded no less than 4 Distinguished Service Orders, the Legion of Honour and the Croix de Guerre. He was also recommended for the Victoria Cross. There is still a campaign for him to be awarded one to this day. But by now, you're probably thinking that to be a great warrior, you have to massacre a lot of people. But the truth is, perhaps the most successful warrior of all time never drew a drop of blood from his enemies, all whilst taking on the South African government, Winston Churchill, and the most successful empire in human history, the British. I'm speaking, of course, of Mahatma Gandhi. Because whilst Gandhi may have been non-violent, he was very much a warrior, and it is his warrior's philosophy that drove him towards this type of combat that makes him perhaps the most successful warrior that has ever lived. And his popular image of a kindly, frail old man doesn't quite capture his remarkable views he held about resistance and courage. As fellow Civ players will already know, behind that benign face lies a murderous genocidal maniac. Gandhi was a believer in the power of true masculinity and despised cowardice in all forms, fiercely believing that non-violent resistance was the highest form of courage, a form cowards had no part in. And his argument was simple. To defend yourself against an enemy is brave, but to confront death head-on whilst refusing to harm anyone, that's far braver. He believed that warriors killed out of a sense of self-preservation, which is in essence a fear of death. He believed that whilst warriors spend years training their abilities with weapons, a true warrior wouldn't let it fall from his hand. Yet at the same time, he believed any man who did not resist evil renounced his manhood. Gandhi believed that non-violence was far more than saying you won't physically attack your enemy. Gandhi referred to his form of non-violence as Satyagraha, meaning truth force or love force. Practicing Satyagraha means a person should seek truth and love whilst refusing through non-violent resistance to participate in something he or she believes is wrong. He believed this form of brave compassion would stir the hearts of his enemies, fill them with admiration for your dignity, and make them repent. He was also shrewd and cunning and understood that persistent resistance was immensely difficult and irritating for those in power. But when everyone saw that the resistor was harmless, they would usually be inclined to take his side, making getting rid of him incredibly difficult. Gandhi is one of the only well-known figures in history to take Jesus, Henry David Thoreau, and Leo Tolstoy by their word, turn the other cheek, and confront evil with love. And it worked. With the exception of India and Pakistan becoming separate countries, Gandhi achieved almost everything he set out to. He defeated the South African government's largest oppression of Indians. He led non-violent marches that prevented the oppression of Indian farmers by British landlords. He protested tax on starving peasants, causing the British to cancel all tax for that year and the next. He led the famous 24-day Salt March against the British, which strategically gained him worldwide exposure. And through his Quit India movement, he successfully rallied the country, made life impossible for the British, and secured India's independence as a nation. An achievement which earned him the unofficial title, Father of the Nation. He did every single step of this whilst facing multiple imprisonments, countless violent beatings, and near-death experiences, and eventually a foe who took his life. As far as warriors go, he was unbelievably successful. Gandhi's peaceful warrior resistance is perhaps what led thinkers like Bertrand Russell to wonder, when confronted by an invader, would it cause more deaths to resist him with violence, or would resisting him with non-violence, compassion, and kindness sway his heart? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really helps me to continue to make these videos. The link's in the description. Also, you can get your hands on a first edition signed copy of my new book, Stick a Flag in It, by heading on over to Unbound Publishing, the link's in the description, and pre-ordering yours today. Thank you.